Welcome back to the warm up. I'm your host, Jake Palmer. Today we got a very special guest, Don Sterling. I've got a lot of intro to do with the man who has done as much as he has in the time that he's done it. And I'll just run right into that. So, Don joined NBA Properties, which was then the marketing and licensing side of the NBA in August 1983. Worked at the NBA through December 86, then rejoined NBA Properties from 88 to 90. During this time, did a lot of cool stuff. He was part of the team that produced and presented the first NBA All-Star Weekend, as we know it today. 84, he was in Denver, part of the team that produced and presented the first Slam Dunk Championship. 85, Indiana. You told me to ask you about a brush in with Michael Jordan. We'll get to that in a little bit. And 86 in Dallas, you were part of the team that tested and produced and then presented the first NBA three-point shootout. And you were present for the first ever NBA draft lottery in 85, where the Knicks won and selected Patrick Ewing. Then, a little bit later, you were with the Jazz from 2013 to 2020, where you led, managed, and won the bid process to get the All-Star game in Salt Lake in 2023. You oversaw the introduction of the NBA 2K League and the Utah Jazz Gaming, and you oversaw G League operations of the Salt Lake City Stars. So, Don, thank you so much for joining. You got a lot to have me talk about today. It's going to be really fun.
It's a checkered past. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Of course. I got to get things out of the way for me first. This is a me thing. I'm a Clippers fan. And so when my wife told me, "Hey, I got a family friend by the name of Don Sterling," I go, "What in the world?" And she was like, "Yeah, he worked with the NBA." And I was like, "Oh, I don't oh." And then did some research and found out that you have an I in your name and he has an E. Very, very key distinction. So just talk to me about that time, because I started kind of watching the NBA 2012-13 when this is kind of going on.
When I began in 83, I can't remember when Donald Sterling with an E bought the team. They were probably still in San Diego. And then, somewhat without permission, he moved the team to Los Angeles.
Oh my.
He was a unique individual. Obviously things didn't end well. But there were times where I had to call the team on NBA Properties business, and I'd say, "Hi, this is Don Sterling calling, the one with NBA Properties." It's not trying to imitate the owner. And then later, when he had his challenges and ultimately was forced to sell the team, um, I would tell somebody my name, and they'd say, "Well, you're not that Don Sterling, are you?" I'd say, "No, different spelling, different spelling." I know you're a Clippers fan. I will have to tell you real quickly though that one of the greatest moments I had during my time at the Jazz was we ended up in a game 7 with the Clippers, and we won the game, and it was at their place, and we end up winning, and which was just extraordinarily exciting because it gave us the right to then go get our hat handed to us by the Golden State Warriors in the next round. But but it's one of those moments, and it's somewhat rare, the fact that we traveled, we were there, and just to hear and see how quiet that building became when it became evident that their home team was not moving on. It was a great moment. Not for a Clippers fan, but for
Not for a Clippers fan. We got you back in 2021 though. I'll say that.
and I will tell you, I've often thought that the Clips literally ripped the heart out of that team, and I don't know if they ever got it back.
Ooh.
You're up by 20 at half, and then the one kid had the game of a career, um, knocking shots down. That was a brutal loss, and I don't know. I truly, we still had the core the next season, but I do not believe we were ever the same
Mm.
after that game. It just took our heart out and stomped on it. Because I
Yeah.
believe we were up. I think we were up. I don't know if we were up 3-0 or at least 2-0. but it let the Clippers back in the series, and then we ended up losing. I think
Hmm.
it's 6. It was
Yeah.
awful. It was awful. Good on you as a Clippers fan.
Hey, we don't have much, so that's the
Yeah.
only thing I got to point to. So I mean,
Yeah.
but we'll talk about the current Jazz a little bit later. Right now, I want to talk about your days with NBA properties because when a lot of people talk about, oh, I had my time with the league, they either played in it or they were a general manager.
Yeah.
Someone, I would not to say that you weren't super prominent, but someone very much in front of the camera, stuff like that. You seem that you were a little bit more behind the scenes. So just talk to me about what NBA properties is for people who don't know and what you kind of did for those
Yeah,
years.
it was a magical time. As you know, and when I joined in August of 86, or excuse me, 83, um, Julius Irving was in the league. Uh, Magic and Larry had just come in the league following themselves playing each other in the national, championship. But the league was still, there were some struggles. There was talk of the Jazz had been in Utah and they were struggling a little bit. The Nuggets were struggling a little bit. I mean, it's not the league that we know today. And so in February of 1984, which coincided with the All-Star game in Denver, David Stern was named commissioner of the league. And the league had already started its ascendancy. First of all, you had the great Celtic Laker series, and you had these two titans of stars with Magic and Larry. And then, it's interesting. You go back and you think, okay, 1984, you had the you had the LA games, the summer games, Olympics in LA, and people started to hear about Michael Jordan. He hit the shot against Georgetown to
Mm-hmm.
win the national championship for North Carolina. But and you remember, and you go back to that draft, and you say, how would you replay that draft? Well, Houston had the number 1 pick, and they picked Hakeem Olajuwon. I mean, I often ask myself if you had to do it over, if Houston had to do it over again, would they still pick Hakeem? And there's tremendous argument to say, yeah, you probably would. I mean, in that day and age, if you could get a big man who could really play, and we'd never seen anybody like Hakeem.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he could really play. So you go, okay, they picked number 1. Uh, um, Number 2 pick was with Portland, and they picked a big guy out of Kentucky named Sam Bowie,
Mm-hmm.
who never really, I mean, he got hurt, I mean, he's a great college player. So then the number 3 pick, well, and you got to remember Portland had Clyde Drexler, who played 2 guard, who's in
Mm-hmm.
the Hall of Fame. And I mean, Clyde was a great player. So if you're Portland, you're going, do we really need another 2 guard? Chicago has the 3rd pick in the draft. And they picked, the 6'6" sophomore out of North Carolina named Michael Jordan. And people have a funny view of history, but it wasn't like, oh, we knew he was going to be
Mm-hmm.
what he turned into be. So they picked Michael. And if I'm not mistaken, I think Philly had the 4th pick. And I mean, it's a great draft. I think that Philly picked Charles Barkley. I mean, it was a pretty good draft, right? But you always go, man, if you redid it, people would generally say, oh yeah, you'd pick MJ. I don't know. I mean, there was reasons why people picked. So then you move into 1984, and everything changed. I mean, it's not that Chicago rose and was winning championships right away. But in fact, I was in Madison Square Garden when it was an exhibition game when the Bulls came in and played the Knicks, and that was the first time any of us living in New York I was able to see Michael up, up close and in person, and you go, ooh, there's just something. There was there was something very special about him. But it wasn't just that it was Michael in Chicago, which is, one of the largest cities in America. He does the Nike deal, and Nike changed everything. I mean, that was just this cocktail of Michael, Nike, where the league was. And you really felt like the closest I, I've said is it's as if you're in a band and you've been toiling a little bit. And then, you've had some hits. It's hard to, it's like Larry and Magic and Doc. I mean, those are Titan players. But then you have that smash record.
Yeah.
And that's Michael coming into the league with Nike, and those commercials. It's the shoes. It's the shoes, right? And it just was a very fun time, and you just felt like, oh, we're on a rocket. And then David Stern was such a genius. And how do we take, so you think about that's 1984, and and I ultimately, left and came back, but then everything changed in 1992 with Dream Team, where now this product, which included Michael and Larry and Magic and, the Dream Team, Charles and everybody was on that team. And now you're exporting this great, it became, that was the beginning of, oh, this is a worldwide global expansion that followed the Summer Games of 1992. So our job was to market, sell sponsorship, sell licensed product. You're probably too young to remember these things called starter jackets, but
Mm.
they were this original sort of almost varsity jacket thing that had NBA logos on it, and you'd see the gold for the Lakers and the green for the Lakers, and it just became suddenly fashion started to also become involved
Mm.
as these players who had growing worldwide brands. It just you always look, were we doing smart things and trying to do the best we could? Absolutely. But you always had to get a little lucky. And you get lucky with, look, Michael was a once in a century player, and it was a fun period to be part of. And then you fast forward into the 90s when they're winning 6 titles.
Mm.
It's a pretty good run for the league. So it was fun to be there early.
Yeah, and I couldn't imagine you talked about getting lucky. I couldn't imagine the difference between 1960s versus 1990s just in society, just in terms of fashion, like
Yeah.
you talked about, just that boom of culture
Yeah.
just
And
skyrocketed everything.
it was there was just I mean, you could spend a whole day on this about the intersection of sports and culture and music. It was the advent of MTV.
Mm.
And suddenly all these artists that you grew up on, now they're doing, short form film, so to speak. And it's fashion, and it's just it was the 80s and 90s were it was pretty fun run in turn because it was so new. It had always been the NFL and it had always been Major League Baseball, and but now the NBA was for real.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you talked about David Stern coming in and changing things up. Do you have any commissioner stories about David Stern specifically? Things how he was
Oh,
in his
yeah.
character.
Thank you for asking, and we miss David. In fact, um, when I was at the Jazz, we were playing Oklahoma City in a playoff series, and I get a call from David's office, and he was no longer the commissioner, but was still very involved. And he his assistant called me and she said, Donnie, that's what David used to call me, but his assistant said, Donnie, David's coming to town and he's going to be at that Sunday night OKC Jazz game, and he's wondering if you would be kind of can you take care of him that night? I said, I would love to. So I was able to meet David. He arrived at the arena. We walked in together, got to our seats, and I think he loved it that, fans recognized him and
Mm.
thanked him. And, he always was willing to take some heat as well if anybody was, giving him a shot, so to speak. Right. I mean, I don't know if you've watched the NBA draft, but there's still the great tradition that when the commissioner walks up to the podium, everybody boos, right? He kind of he loved that, but it was so a couple stories. One was I worked for a woman named Arlene Weltman, who was the vice president of marketing. In fact, her son is the general manager now of the Orlando Magic. Um, and he asked us to come over and update him on some project we were working on. And he asked a question, and we weren't prepared for the question. But we tried to bluff our way through with the answer. And he became volcanic in his anger that we were trying to bluff him and didn't have the information. And I had one of those out of body experiences where we're sitting in his office, Arlene and myself, but I'm sort of now back in the air watching this conversation, and we are just getting blasted. Okay. And uh, it one, it was a very good lesson. If you don't have the answer, just say we don't have that answer. We don't have that information. Number two, it it was a testament to me of his passion for performance and good work.
Mm.
Okay. What you also learned in time was if he didn't care about you and really have a deep sort of affection for you, he would have never reacted that way. I mean, it was sort of the sign that, oh, not only is this issue important to David, but we're important to David. We're part of the team. We're part of the family. And sometimes you have to get in the face of your family members, which he did. And to this day, I never felt anything but love and affection from David Stern. Was he tough? Yes. Would he drive you? Yes. Was he relentless on things? Yes. But there was this underlining love and affection that taught me a lot about how culture works and how great teams work. You can have those hard, if not very animated discussions. And you can have your hat handed to you by your boss. But if you know your boss loves you and has affection for you, and we're all just trying to be successful, well, then that's something very special. Very special. One other story that tells you about David as the person. Um, and Jake, I'm like, I'm not that old at the time. I mean, so in 1988, I'm like, 31. Okay. Yeah, I'm just, and that experience with David prior to that, I'm probably 26, 27. I'm not that old. It's like, oof, that was quite the lesson, right? But these were so informative and just really helped make me who I am in many ways because of these experiences. But sometimes the context of the experience, I go, man, it's hard to believe we did that. So here was the experience. I think it was 87, 88. Uh, we are traveling from New York to Los Angeles. There used to be a 9 o'clock flight out of Kennedy that would get in, you get the time difference. So you leave at 9 from Kennedy and you get in about 9, right? Or 10 and land in LA. But the reason we were going to LA was because the very next day, David was going to present Magic with his Most Valuable Player award. Okay. And I was over the account and the sponsor who sponsored the Most Valuable Player award. So you can imagine, here's me and David in the town car, leaving Midtown New York, leaving Midtown Manhattan, driving out to Kennedy. And I get in the car and he says, I hope you don't mind, but I have some calls to make. He said, yes, sir, I'm good. There was a member of NBA Entertainment, which used to do all the videos and all the film work for the NBA, who had just been diagnosed with cancer. What David did on the way from Midtown Manhattan to Kennedy was to reach out to oncologists trying to find the best and the brightest to say, one of my staffers just got diagnosed with cancer. Can he come see you? It's like, of all the things David could be doing, what he was doing was he was trying to help this staff member who had just been diagnosed with cancer to try to get him the absolute best medical care he possibly could. I was like, okay, there's a Yiddish phrase, which is the word is mensch, which means good guy, great soul. David was the ultimate mensch. I mean, he could have that experience like we had in his office, right? But his aim was true. I mean, he was a true mensch. He just wanted to take care of others and help others and get them to be their best. So I owe a huge amount of gratitude to David Stern.
That's amazing. It sounds like you had an overall great environment there. I mean, great mentors, great people working all around. I want to know. Let's run the clock back a little bit to presenting All Star Weekend. That I love All Star Weekend. I know now it gets a lot of flack and whatever got going on.
Right.
They're trying new things. I love it every single year. It's just such an event for me. So talk about bringing that in and how was that process?
So what's interesting was my wife and I are living in LA. We just had our first son, Jay. Um, we got married in 82. We had Jay in July of 83. And I realized I wanted to go to work for the NBA. I had been doing some other things and my dad worked at the league at the time. He was vice president of operations, was over the referees. And so he is already in New York working for the league. And I said, hey, I'd like to maybe get into the family business. Um, can you just get me some interviews? I'd like to go to work and see what we can do. So anyway, interestingly, I get a sales position with the Denver Nuggets. Okay. So our son is born. My dad comes out for the baby blessing. We take care, and I pick him up at LAX, and we're driving north on the 405 from LAX out to what's called the Valley. We lived in Northridge. And he says offhandedly, hey, by the way, I put your name in for a job at the NBA. And literally, the thought came into my mind, yeah, right. So we moved to Denver. Okay. I'm going to sell tickets. Make 600, guaranteed $600 a month plus commissions. All right. I
Mm.
mean, we would have had it was, this is starting at the entry level, so to speak. So I am, we get there, we move in, get an apartment. I go to work Monday. Literally on Friday of the first week, I get a call from the president of MBA Properties who said, "Hey, this is Adrian DeGroot, president of MBA Properties. Your dad gave me your resume and we'd love to have you come to work for us." And I'm going, "Oh my goodness." He said, "Look, we'll pay for your move." But a little background. April and I get married. Together, we're making $25,000. This is 1983, our combined income. All right. So he says, "We'll pay for your travel. We'll pay for the move." Not that we had a lot. And then he says, "And I hope this is okay, but we can start you out at 25,000." It's like, we're thinking, oh, we have hit the big time, right? But now I got to go in and tell the general manager of the Nuggets, "Hey, by the way, I'm out of here." I'd been there a week.
Oh my gosh.
So we just repacked and kept moving east. Okay. And in August of 83, I go to work for MBA Properties. Well, then it dawned on me as well, that Denver was hosting the 1984 NBA All-Star Game. So now these people that I worked for a week, I'm going to come back working for the league to do the All-Star Game. And there was a gentleman at NBA Properties named Rick Welts, who is now in the Basketball Hall of Fame, did immense work working for the NBA, then became president of the Phoenix Suns, then became president of the Golden State Warriors, won some rings. Okay. Then, most recently, was just named the president of the Dallas Mavericks. So he's at the Mavericks for not very long when they make the trade of Luka.
Oh boy.
So I call him up. I texted him. I said, "And so the Rick Welts era begins." Because, they took they just they got whacked on that trade, right?
Yeah.
He said, "Oh, you can't imagine how brutal it is. Just brutal."
Oh.
So then I text him recently. "Those guys get the number one pick in the draft. They're going to draft Cooper Flagg." He said, "It is just hard to explain how all this has happened." Anyway, Welts had this idea with David to create a weekend, and they use the phrase that becomes a celebration of our sport. And in those days, it was, now it seems somewhat quaint. There was a party Friday night. The players were around. It wasn't like they were sequestered. It was like they were stoked to be there. So they had a party Friday night. And then we had this idea for All-Star Saturday. Now, All-Star Saturday at the time, this shows you how smart we were. We knew it was a moment to reintroduce the Slam Dunk Championship, which had been in the ABA, the American Basketball Association. Okay. And now the leagues had merged, of course. But in 1976, the All-Star Game was in Denver. And they had a Slam Dunk Championship, which was won by Julius Erving.
Mm.
Okay, because he's in the ABA still at that point. So we said, okay, on Saturday, you have got to have the Slam Dunk Championship. And we got to get Julius to come back, because he's playing for Philly, and which he did. But this is how smart we are. We had been influenced that Major League Baseball had an old timers game where they brought back a lot of the great legends of baseball to play. We said, let's do the same. So you talk about a thrill. Jerry West, Oscar Robertson, Willis Reed. I had the opportunity personally to call up and invite John Havlicek, Pete Maravich. I mean, Maravich was a hero of mine growing up.
Mm.
And now we're talking to these guys and they're going to come and play. Um, Now, what we didn't realize is that's not a very pretty game to watch. These guys are not quite what they used to be, except Rick Barry, who thought he could still play in the league at that point. I mean, he and Calvin Murphy, they thought, it's like they're out for blood. So the way we organized it was the slam dunk was first, and then we had the Legends game. Well, we learned that if we were going to do it again, you better put the Legends game first,
Mm.
then go to the slam dunk. But it just was a huge hit because the NFL had the Super Bowl, which was a huge thing. The NBA didn't, they had the playoffs, which are great, but it's not like like a finite event. So the All-Star weekend over time became it became the celebration of the NBA over a weekend. And ultimately, as it turned into the Slam Dunk Championship. We had the Legends game. That next year, or in '86, we introduced the 3-point shootout, which it was just a privilege to be part of these teams that, yeah, let's try this. And so we'd go test it. We tested it with the NBA had a minor league basketball league at the time, and we were testing it at the minor league to see if this would work. Until that day in Dallas in 1986, when we had the first shooter in the first round, which is Craig Hodges, who could really shoot it, we didn't know it was going to work. Until that moment, that first shooter with Craig in that first round, we're all kind of looking around at each other going, oh my goodness, this is a hit. And it's the first one where Larry walked into the locker room before the event and said, okay, boys, who's coming in second? And he ultimately won it. But it started with that idea that let's create a celebration of our sport. We're in Denver. Let's bring back the Slam Dunk Championship that Doc won in '76, and he'll compete in '84. And there were just things happening where you had the ability to try things, and there was just a great appetite that people loved the sport. So the next year, we're in Indianapolis. MJ's rookie year. Okay. And the day before, he didn't win the Slam Dunk Championship, but he was in it. Caused a little bit of a stir because he opted not to wear his Chicago Bulls uniform. He wore what we saw for the first time was Nike Jumpman attire.
Mm.
He wore his own attire, the Nike Jordan brand, which the older players were not very happy about. So now it's Sunday, and he's in the All-Star game. He's as a rookie. He's been named to the All-Star game as a rookie. And I'm walking around the floor, and I got my NBA badge. He doesn't know me from anybody other than, oh, that dude's in a suit and he's got an NBA credential on. So he comes up to me and he says, hey. I said, yeah. I forgot my warm-up bottoms at my hotel room. Here's my hotel key. Will you run over to the hotel and get my warm-ups? I said, sure. I mean, things were just a little more innocent and quaint at that time. So I remember running over, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I'm in MJ's hotel room. Grabbed his stuff and came hustling back, but it was a different era, different time, but way fun.
That's awesome. Oh my gosh. That
That
is
was
so funny.
also, if you read about that All-Star game, All-Star games then, first quarter was a lot of showtime. Started getting a little more serious second, third quarter. Fourth quarter, lockdown defense. I mean, they were playing to win. But that was the All-Star game where uh, there's conspiracies. This is when Isaiah Thomas is the point guard for the East, and there's other that they decided not to pass Michael the ball
Oh.
in the third and fourth quarter of the game. The famous Jordan ice out game, All-Star game. Yeah, you know, I don't know if that was true or not, but it goes back that they were upset that this guy, who's this uppity guy coming in wearing his own stuff during the slam dunk championship. And now ultimately Michael Jordan made every one of those other players a lot of money over the period of time. They should be grateful for everything that MJ brought.
Yeah, I mean, that's there's so much history. That is so cool.
A lot of history. A lot of history. And you mentioned the lottery. It's the first lottery they ever had. And New York, the Knicks are in the lottery, and there used to be this notion that that for advertisers and sponsors, that if the Knicks were doing well, then the league must be doing great, right? So so now the Knicks are in the lottery, and they've not been very good up until that point, beyond their glory days of the mid 70s. And this it was so sort of innocent time. They had this big bowl, and they had square envelopes, and David would
Hmm.
reach in and pull out an envelope. And of course, the conspiracy was that they're going to make this so the Knicks get Patrick Ewing,
Hmm.
and so that they kept the Knicks envelope in the freezer until the time of the lottery. And then David would, when it was time to do the number one pick, he had left the chilled envelope to last so he could get the Knicks the win of the lottery.
Mm.
Now, I will tell you, I was in the near front row for that lottery. It was just like the Mavs getting Cooper Flag. It's just luck.
Yeah.
Bad luck for the Jazz, not great luck, and great luck for the Mavs. It was great luck for the Knicks that year.
Yeah, can you speak to how hard it might be to rig one of those?
Yeah, look, and I can't remember which auditing firm it is, an accounting firm. I don't know if it's KPMG or Deloitte and Touche, Deloitte. I mean, you'd have to have so many people on the take
Mm.
to make it happen. And by the way, the commissioner of the NBA works for the owners. The owners don't work for him. He works for the owners,
Interesting.
meaning that they determine what his pay is. He has great relationships with them, most of them, but it's not like, Adam Silver does not feel a tremendous obligation to do his very best for the entire group of owners,
Hmm.
right? There's no way. I mean, think about how ludicrous this is. That the other owners would conspire with the league to allow Dallas to somehow get a leg up,
Yeah.
right? And oh, think about this too. Oh, yeah, San Antonio's such an important market. Let's make sure Wemby goes to San Antonio.
Yeah.
I mean, it just now is it devastating? It was hard. I mean, it was hard for me to watch the lottery because it was a painful season for the home
Yeah.
team,
Hmm.
right? And now you have a chance to get perhaps a generational player.
Yeah.
And then maybe if you don't get them, at least maybe you fall to two or three.
Hmm.
But five?
That's
That was a gut punch, man. That
yeah.
was a gut punch. And my wife April, who generally always speaks truth, she said, "Hey, we've seen it before. getting the number one pick doesn't guarantee.
There you go.
It just, I mean, I always say, look, we got Donovan in a trade
Yep.
at 17. Okay, he was picked 13th by the Nuggets. And then we had 17 and we did the trade. So we got Donovan in effect at 17.
Mm-hmm.
We got Rudy at 27. And I think Jokic was in the second round.
Yeah.
So it would have helped, you know, if Cooper Flag's coming into town. One thing NBA teams do, if you're struggling with your record, you always want to be able to sell a little bit of hope.
Mm-hmm.
Cooper would have meant some hope,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Doesn't guarantee that you get to the finals in year one, but it's so hard to now that I mean, they're coming in the league as kids. I mean, they're 19, 20 years old, right? I remember, I can't remember who it says. Somebody said most NBA players don't grow into their man body till they're 26, 27 years old.
Yeah.
So but yeah, it was a tough night for the home team.
Yeah. And I've obviously don't work for the NBA. I just like to talk about it on my YouTube channel. But I talked to a ton of people who think that these conspiracies actually work. And I'm like, okay, well, let's look at two of the biggest prospects last couple of decades, or last decade. Anthony Davis goes to New Orleans. Zion Williamson also goes to New Orleans. New Orleans doesn't seem like this great hot spot. And Zion coming out of Duke was insane.
Look, it is. I know there's the left coast, right coast conspiracy. There's the big market conspiracy. Now it's, well, we got to save Dallas because they made this trade of a generational player and didn't shop it, and just did the trade. The greatest, one of the funniest jokes I heard was, um, yeah, LA calls Dallas and says, uh, or yeah, what would it take to get, what can you give us for, or no, they call and say, hey, Dallas calls and says, hey, what would it take to pry Anthony Davis to come to Dallas? He's off the table. Unavailable. What if we send you Luca? He'll be on the next flight tomorrow, Sunday.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just, I've been in the league, or in and around the league a long, long time. Never seen anything like that.
Wow.
They didn't even shop the deal.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, had they shopped it, including the Jazz,
Oh, dude.
they would have put a package together.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it just mind blowing. I will tell you a trade that my dad did, which is noted as one of the worst trades in the history of the NBA. Now, he did some good things. Okay, made some great moves as a general manager. So he's at Golden State, and I think it's 81 or 82. It had to be the 81 or 82 draft. And the coach of the Warriors, a guy named Alvin Avils. Golden State has the third pick. Okay. And the Celtics have the first pick. Okay. So Alvin goes to my dad and says, hey, we got this dog center. We got to move him. There's a kid at Purdue who Alvin said, I think he's the next one, the next thing. So my dad trades the dog center and the number 3 pick to Boston for the number 1 pick in the draft. Okay. And with the number one pick in the draft, the Golden State Warriors take a player named Joe Barry Carroll, who
Hmm.
was center out of Purdue. Had a couple, turned out to have a couple all-star years, but clearly was not the next thing. Okay. So the quote, underachieving center he sent to Red Auerbach in the Boston Celtics was Robert Parrish.
Oh.
And the number 3 pick was a lanky forward out of Minnesota named Kevin McHale.
No way. Oh my gosh, that's terrible. Wow.
So later in 2004, I moved to Boston to oversee the Massachusetts Sports Commission, right? Which is tasked with bringing sports events and activities into Boston to bring the Massachusetts generate economic impact. So I would stand up and say, I'd be asked to speak and I'd say, well, let me just tell you, my friends, our family has done a lot already to help the Commonwealth of
Oh
Massachusetts.
my gosh. Oh man.
Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't.
Hmm.
Let's see what happens in Dallas and LA. I mean, I don't know what was going on in Dallas. You see that sort of trade and you go, is he a good teammate? Is there check? The ball is in his hands so much.
Hmm.
Does he got generational skills? Absolutely, right? But you go, man, that is some trade. Can he get into shape? He's been getting is he durable? It looked like he was out of gas, in the Lakers series.
Hmm.
And so now, if you're Nico Harrison, you're going, yeah, I got Anthony Davis and I got Cooper Flag. Now they got to get Kyrie healthy,
Yeah.
but it's a funny league, man.
Hmm.
Just never know.
And to tag off of that really quick, I got a video coming out soon. I'm doing some research for based off Nico Harrison's defense wins championships mantra.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna say it's not looking too hot in terms of the modern NBA. I'll just say that the video is gonna come out. It doesn't a lot of high octane offenses that have solid defenses, but you never have the really good defense with the middling offense go and win a championship.
Listen, you gotta you gotta be able to score it. I mean, and uh, that I think I love, Rudy did such great work for us in Utah, really worked hard, really a good human, I think at times largely misunderstood, right? It's probably, being French and,
Yep.
it's just, and you're a big guy and it's just it's always a little challenging, but can you win in the NBA with a more traditional center? That is a question. And you look at you look at you look at these teams playing now. I watched last night was the game one of OKC and the T Wolves. It's not that the OKC is without length and size, but man, they got bodies that just keep coming after
Hmm.
you. And you got one guy who's very, very special,
Hmm.
with SGA. I mean, it's so that these series, man, I love this time of year.
Oh, it's great.
I miss the opening rounds though, because you have games every night.
I know, yeah. And now it's not as much basketball, but it's good. I will say I do enjoy the Luka trade, the fact that it happened because before that, my team made the most recent worst trade for Paul George, SGA, giving them the 14th pick. They get Jalen Williams. Now they're back to back 1 seed. So that was not a great look. He had to do it, but I did not see Shea becoming an MVP at all. No, there was no way. So,
And you know, it's funny people point to uh, our guy at OKC, their basketball guru, oversees basketball ops, right? His name's slipping my mind right now, but they did stockpile picks,
mhm,
right? But it was the trade that changed everything.
yeah.
And one of the things, I'm a big believer in Danny Ainge. He does good work. Justin does great work. Justin Zanuck. I mean, you got two guys who know how to get it done. It's just harder to get it done these days. The way the collective bargaining agreement is framed, it's just harder to do deals.
Hmm.
And so I don't doubt that they burn the phones up every trade deadline, and
Yeah.
they'll be burning the phones up leading to the draft and free agency, and it's just harder. It's just harder to get big. That's why again, the Luca AD deal was just mind blowing in so many ways.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, so you're talking about your time with the Jazz, talking about Danny Ainge. Let's move forward a little bit. Got a couple things before we let you go. Maybe a lot of things. I don't know. I got a lot I want to talk about. How much time you got?
Well, we take a few more minutes. What we'll do is we could do a part two.
Let's do a part two. We'll do that. To end out part one, let's talk about your time with the Jazz, 2013 to 2020. You weren't with the team in a traditional sense, more kind of once again behind the scenes, making a lot of moving parts.
Side for sure.
Yeah. So talk to me about that time. That's more recent.
Yeah, I I arrived. My first season was 13-14. Ty Corbin's was the coach. We won 25 games.
Hmm.
It was a really long season, and I have empathy for my pals that are still at the Jazz. 17 wins is a extraordinarily long season.
Hmm.
Okay. I mean, that means basically you're winning once every 4 attempts. It's a long season. And no matter, and I think Coach Hardy did as good a job as possible to, it just is long. It's long. Um, so the Miller family and then Dennis Lindsay make the hire of Quinn Snyder. And it's you look back and maybe it's part nostalgia and part that we were there, but when you're part of something that's on the rise and not initially obvious, right? And then things start to happen. It's a magical ride. It's almost mystical how things come together. And it didn't happen right away. Uh, when you think about, I think when we went from 25 wins and then got into the 30s, right? That first season. And, then we were at about, then we were at 500 and knocking on the door of the playoffs. But then you just think about, I always think about Gordon Hayward and some of the what ifs, because the guy could really play, probably not best suited to be the alpha on the team, but really could play. I mean, he had great NBA skills. And I remember as clear as, because we did everything we could to keep Gordon, everything. And I remember we were renovating the arena, so the summer league was up at the Huntsman Center at the University of Utah. And it was the evening of July 3rd. And we're playing a summer league game, and it's the Utah Jazz versus the Boston Celtics. So, really, one of the first times we saw Donovan,
Mm.
and also the first time we saw Jason Tatum.
Wow.
Okay. And I just remember as clear as day, because it's funny with Donovan, it was like, yeah, he's really good defensively. Okay. I mean, he was a pretty good player defensively, got to work on his offense. I mean,
Wow.
it just shows you. I'll give you another working scouting report. You tell me who the player was. We're not sure if his body will hold up. He's had some ankle issues, and we're not sure if he can play the point.
Oh boy.
Steph Curry.
Yeah, that's I was like, wow.
Think about that.
Yeah.
Okay. And so Donovan gets in, and it's like, well, first of all, he's got offensive skills, right? I mean, there's something going, but, and then the very next day, July 4th, Gordon signs with the Celtics.
Mhm.
Okay. So we go through that summer, and it's like a heartbreaking summer, but where there's, Rudy's coming along, we got Donovan, and I don't know if you remember, but game one, home game, I think we're playing the Dubs. Rodney Hood was going to start it, the two, and had some intestinal issues, and he ended up not being able to play that night. So Quinn puts Donovan in,
Yeah.
and that started it, right? So it was just, we had those magical series against your Clips and, playoff Paul and, and against OKC. And I mean, it was just a really magical time to be, and Quinn was emerging as a really good head coach. Um, Rudy was improving and was going to get, defensive player of the year. We had Joe Ingles, you had Ricky Rubio. There was just this magic, right? And then sort of the 2.0 of that with Bojan and Mike
Yeah.
Conley. And there's just, I look back fondly on those years and being able to be part of, you're part of that team that creates not just what's on the floor, but what's happening off the floor. We had some difficult times. We had the fan incident with Russell Westbrook.
Yeah.
I was head of communications for the team at that point. Comms came over me, and just to see how, Gail and the Miller family and Steve Starks as CEO handled that for our team and talking to the players, and then, Gail in that, pretty memorable night when she came to center court, scolded the fans and said, "This is not who we are." It was a magical time. But like I said, sometimes that window doesn't stay open very long. And, when we talked earlier about that game down in LA against your Clippers, I almost felt like, wow, kind of took our heart out and ripped it. And then the next year you kind of knew. I mean, people say, well, you should have held on to Donovan. You should have, with Rudy. Well, Donovan was going to be an unrestricted free agent. There was high likelihood he was going to leave. So let's try to get something for it.
Hmm.
So, I mean, I don't think can't remember if that was Ainge. We may have not, we may have sold the team already, but I understand why they did what they did with Donovan.
Hmm.
And, the Rudy thing, I think Rudy would have enjoyed staying here, but maybe, basketball ops felt like, I'm not sure in today's NBA, that's the best use for us of the five.
Yeah.
Now, the Minnesota Jazz have seemed to do pretty well right now with Rudy and Mike
Oh yeah.
and Alexander
Yep.
and Joe.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
It's like I love watching that team because I think Anthony Edwards is just it's must watch basketball with
Oh,
Anthony Edwards
love him.
and with SGA. I mean, he's pretty good.
Yeah. So last thing we'll talk about before I let you go. Thanks for coming on again. This has been amazing.
I as you can probably tell, I love hoop. It's been so
Oh,
much a part of my life, you know.
oh yeah. Talk to me about current state of affairs of the Jazz as a fan watching. Is it a little rough? More hopeful for the future, even though you got, the fifth pick when you could have had the first one. How are you feeling about the Jazz as of this moment?
Like I said, I have great confidence in Danny and Justin. I mean, those guys are pros. And if there's deals to be had, they're going to do it. It's my dad was spent 27 years with the Sacramento Kings,
Hmm.
and it's harder than one would think to take a team that is, had some losing seasons. It's harder than people think to immediately move that team into the playoffs.
Yeah.
It's just hard. It's just hard to put together. You got to be smart. You got to work within the salary cap. You got to work within collective bargaining. And frankly, you got to get a little lucky. Okay. Um, I don't think any of, I think if Dennis Lindsay, who really does good work, by the way, as well, I think if you asked him, did you see in Donovan what he turned out to be? He probably would have to say, we knew there was that upside. We did not know that it would be this.
Mm-hmm.
He was also at San Antonio on the basketball ops side when they drafted Kawhi.
Oh my
It's like, I
gosh.
don't know if anybody saw Kawhi turning into what Kawhi became. Um, so uh, I think I don't think anybody should think that, oh, we're going to go from 17 to 45 wins overnight. To go up, let me say this in the NBA, to go up 5 to 6 games, wins, it's a lot of hard work.
Mm-hmm.
To go up double digit wins is you just things need to fall in place. So, I mean, if the Jazz can go from 17 wins to 24, 25 wins, right? But it's looking like it's moving up.
Yeah.
And you're seeing, the young ones start to emerge, right? Then you go, okay, that's when that magic band building becomes
Mm-hmm.
starts to happen. It's like, okay, there's something mystical happening here. Let's keep doing this, right? And then you hope to get a little lucky with your picks. Maybe there's a free agent that says, let me come to, oh, there's an opportunity for me in Utah. Let me go play for Will Hardy. Let me go play with Markkinen,
Mm-hmm.
and they got these kids and let's try to make it happen. So I'm optimistic, but I would suggest to Jazz fans there's still going to be a need for some patience.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, living in Cedar City, I'm surrounded by them all over the place. But I really do like the draft picks, especially they picked up last year. Love Isaiah Collier, Cody Williams. Both those guys I had done a video on as two of my top 5 favorite draft prospects before the draft. They slipped a little bit. Then they get Kyle Filipowski in the second round out of Duke. Thought that was a great pickup.
Yeah.
I think they've got some good guys in the future.
some pieces.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. There's some pieces. I will leave you with this though. If you do a history of the league and those teams that get to the promised land, you really need three players. I mean, you need three, if not generational players, three elite players. If you think about the Celtics who win last year, right? You got Jalen, right? And you got Jason. And I mean, Drew Holiday is a great player. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But you got 2 to 3 dogs that are just going to every night, you know, that you can put the ball in their hands and say, we need a bucket. Get us a freaking bucket. Okay. If you look at Golden State when they were rolling, at one point they had up to 4 players.
Yeah.
Steph, Clay, KD, Draymond. Okay. If you look at, I mean, if you go around, you need a minimum of 2 elites, if not a third and a fourth. If you look at, let's look at Denver. I mean, you got Joker, who's arguably the best player on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
You had Jamal, right? And then you had those other pieces. It's like, okay, let's roll. You think about where Minnesota is. I mean, obviously you got an extraordinary player in Ant. You know, there's just and there's other pieces on that team that can on any given night. Now, as they say, it's a miss or make league, and last night they missed a lot.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if they would have had a chance, but you think about SGA and that team. I mean, they got one plus another 3 to 4 that on any given night can be really, really good.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at the Jazz right now, you'd say, well, Lowry is certainly a would be part of your 3, right?
Oh yeah.
They just don't have the other 2 right now.
Yeah. There we go.
So you got to be patient, got to get a little lucky. And trust me, there is nobody that hates losing more than Danny Ainge.
Mm.
I know him. I know him personally. That dude doesn't like to lose. But he knows you got to be patient when you're putting this together. So I love hoop. I love watching that team as hard as it was this year. And I know it was hard for fans. But sometimes you got to go through this to then have an opportunity to start climbing the mountain again.
That's how it goes. Yeah.
They
Early 2010s, had that peak late 2010s, and then had to kind of restart. And
Like I said, we
back.
went through that season of 25 wins. It was a long season.
Yeah.
But it felt unbelievable to get into the 30s because we know we were going the right way.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a guy on your team that was must-watch basketball
Yeah.
with Donovan.
Yeah. Well, good stuff. Thank you so much for coming on. I wish I could shake your hand.
It's my pleasure to be able to talk hoop.
Yeah. We'll have to reconnect. We'll do part 2.
Love it. Anytime I'm ready, we can talk anytime.
Perfect. Thank you so much.